We begin with a breaking development. The Trump administration now asserts it is engaged in armed conflict with drug cartels. The claim comes in a memo sent to Congress, obtained by multiple news outlets, marking an escalation in U.S. policy toward transnational criminal organizations. We return you now to live coverage from the White House, where sources indicate the administration is seeking legal authority to treat cartel operations as military targets under the law of armed conflict. In a decision drawing sharp criticism from Democrats and civil liberties advocates, the administration has formally declared that cartel groups now rank among non-state actors in combat against U.S. interests. A key passage in the memo insists that based upon the cumulative effects of hostile acts against the citizens and interests of the United States and friendly foreign nations, the President is determined that the United States is engaged in a non-international armed conflict with these organizations. The President has ordered the Department of War, effectively the military establishment, to conduct operations accordingly. Critics have raised alarm, arguing that such a designation sidesteps due process protections, especially when strikes or military force are authorized without judicial oversight. But the administration is unbowed. In public remarks over the past week, the President warned bluntly, "If you try to poison our people, we will blow you out of existence," because that, in his words, is the only language they really understand. He points to the disappearance of drug smuggling vessels near Venezuela and claims that cartel networks across the Caribbean are now on notice. This is not merely a rhetorical shift. Officials argue the new legal framework allows targeted operations, drone strikes, naval interdictions, air raids, without sending U.S. ground forces into cartel strongholds. Instead of relying on cooperation with host nations or complex criminal extradition treaties, the administration will treat cartel leadership and their infrastructure as legitimate military targets, akin to jihadist terror groups. The memo parallels earlier designations of ISIS or al-Qaeda as foreign terrorist organizations. In fact, at the moment, the President first named cartels terrorists. I asked him whether U.S. special forces might soon cross borders to conduct raids. He replied, "Stranger things have happened." From January onward, the administration had placed several prominent cartels, such as the Sinaloa, Jalisco New Generation, and Gulf cartels, on its list of foreign terrorist organizations. That move was controversial, given the long-standing practice of treating drug trafficking as a criminal issue. Now, the shift toward militarization signals a new chapter. The question is, will this legal shift help or harm U.S. efforts to stem the flow of narcotics, money, and violence across borders? Observers note that this approach hinges on a few critical assumptions. First, that cartel leadership constitutes a coherent military chain of command and infrastructure susceptible to kinetic targeting. Second, that strikes against cartel facilities and shipments will indeed degrade their capability without provoking blowback. Third, that the administration can maintain such operations while minimizing civilian harm or avoid the legal and diplomatic costs when civilian casualties occur. Even the strongest critics of prior administrations concede that long-time efforts to interdict boats or impose sanctions have had limited success. But now the playing field has dramatically changed. If we look historically, U.S. efforts against drug smuggling have relied on a mix of law enforcement, interdiction, cooperation with Mexico and Central American nations, and conditional foreign aid. Programs such as Plan Merida, the Merida Initiative, have aimed to strengthen security institutions and judicial systems abroad. But critics have long argued that corruption, impunity, and weak institutions undermined those efforts. This latest step effectively bypasses those institutions and places the cartel fight squarely in military terms. Within Congress, reactions are mixed. Some Republican lawmakers herald the memo as a bold, necessary response to decades of failed policies. Others, especially among the moderate wing, express concern about constitutionality, oversight, and the risk of mission creep. A number of Democratic lawmakers have voiced alarm. They argue that bombing cartel members without judicial review violates constitutional rights and international human rights norms. Some have threatened legal challenges, pointing to precedent on executive war powers and extrajudicial killing. Internationally, Latin American governments and regional blocs are watching closely. Mexico's government, in particular, faces a delicate diplomatic balancing act. While the United States has long pressed Mexico to do more to fight drug trafficking and cartel violence, the idea of unilateral U.S. strikes or a military framework risks sovereignty controversies. Mexican officials have thus far offered cautious remarks, emphasizing the need for cooperation and respect for international law. Some Central American nations have expressed unease at the expansion of US military posture in their hemisphere. On the ground, cartel influence in regions from Mexico through Central America and the Caribbean remains pervasive. Cartel groups run smuggling corridors through the Caribbean Sea, routes off Venezuela, and maritime links to major US ports. They ship not only drugs, but also cash, precursor chemicals, weapons, and occasionally migrants. In places like Honduras, Guatemala, and El Salvador, cartel-linked gangs operate with impunity in zones of weak state control. The destabilizing impact is not limited to drug flow. It fuels violence, weakens governance, and in some cases aids broader transnational criminal networks and money laundering across borders. Public opinion in the United States is likely to react sharply. Many Americans are fed up with drug overdose deaths, cartel violence spilling over the border, and drug routes that reach domestic communities. Others will worry about the risks of the military option, escalation, unintended casualties, civil liberties erosion. Legal scholars warn that once the executive branch claims authority to target non-state actors on foreign soil without host nation consent, the entire paradigm of cross-border use of force is altered. From a strategic vantage, the administration may see this as a long overdue correction. They argue that cartels have evolved beyond mere trafficking rings. They now engage in hybrid tactics, including paramilitary operations, cooperation with guerrilla groups, and territorially controlled zones. In that sense, the cartels are no longer purely criminal. They resemble quasi-military insurgents. Under that logic, military tools now seem justified. Still, obstacles abound. Intelligence gathering on cartel infrastructure is tricky. Cartel leaders are mobile, protected, often embedded within civilian populations. Ensuring precision in strikes is difficult. Diplomatic fallout is possible if host countries object or civilian harm occurs. Congressional oversight will be critical. How will Congress approve these operations? Will there be public reporting or congressional war powers triggers? Will the courts intervene? In the weeks and months ahead, key indicators to watch will include official strike reports, casualty statistics, any pushback from Congress or the courts, and responses from Latin American governments. Also revealing will be how the administration balances enforcement with continued demand reduction efforts, such as domestic drug treatment, supply reduction, and prevention. In sum, the Trump administration's decision to treat cartel organizations as military adversaries marks a dramatic shift. It reframes the drug war as an armed conflict, potentially opening the door for more aggressive action with fewer constraints. Whether this yields breakthroughs or deepens controversy remains to be seen. But as this story unfolds on Capitol Hill, in courtrooms and across borders, one thing is certain: the stakes are higher than ever.